this meeting to order of the New Ulm Economic Development Authority. Would you mind taking roll call, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Commissioner Brom,
Present.
Commissioner Fix,
Present.
Commissioner Yanni,
Present.
Commissioner Schultz,
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Here.
and President Schmitz is absent.
Great, thank you, Heather. We'll move on to item number 2, approval of the minutes from the regular EDA meeting on October 10th.
I'll offer a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Motion is approved. Item number 3 from the New Ulm Economic Development Corporation Coordinator regarding activities during the month of October 2017.
Brian Toll, New Ulm Economic Development Corporation. I have an extra presentation for you today. I had hoped to make a request for funding, but I've been told I cannot do that. We have members from my EDC board. We've got Julie Baumgartner, Shannon Hillersheim, Jeff Dietrich, Dean Laraway, and Dustin Cross, all from the EDC board.
Brian, just a clarification, you can, but not at this meeting because it's not part of the agenda items.
Yep.
Okay.
I've requested that it be part of your next agenda. I've already done that. I was told this morning I couldn't do it today.
Okay.
So, summary of operations. All right, how do we get this to work here? The New Ulm Economic Development Corporation is a nonprofit entity. We are not part of the city. We partner with the city and the Chamber of Commerce on projects or prospects as they come along. We have been instrumental in attracting new businesses to New Ulm. And some examples of that would include, let me get this out here. LK Manufacturing, Beacon Promotions, Spexis, United Commercial Upholstery, Frontier Labs, and DLC Manufacturing are all companies that we brought to town. Okay. We have also been proactive in marketing New Ulm to potential new businesses. We're reaching out to the existing businesses in town to nurture relationships, and this is a key activity for NUEDC, and a lot of people call that business retention. So we're visiting with the plant managers or the owners on a regular basis. Keeping existing businesses up to date on a wide variety of resources that are available to them as they're considering growth. And this would include the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation, Region 9, and SBA as a few examples. We assist companies that need help in navigating through applications to these resources. A lot of times these businesses do this only once. And so for them to get through all of the process and the applications and the forms can be confusing, and we help them with that. We understand the process. We have constructed and leased manufacturing facilities when needed. 2 examples of that are Beacon Promotions and Parker Hannafin, the building with the red octagonal front by Artstone. We put that building up and had leased it to MTS. Eventually, MTS was sold to Parker. We maintain data on available buildings and the local labor force. One of the trends in economic development is that site selectors and others that look at expanding a business use the internet almost exclusively, at least for the first step or two. So when they're gathering information about a community, they rely on the web for that. So we keep that updated on a monthly basis. And we also represent New Ulm to outside organizations such as Region 9, SBA 504, the Initiative Foundation, and DEED. Some examples of some of the larger projects that we've worked on over the last 10 years. AMPI. After the fire at the butter plant, we all remember that, NUEDC coordinated local and outside incentives to have AMPI rebuild in New Ulm. AMPI was considering moving the butter business to different communities. They were looking at 2 other communities. They were also looking at getting out of the butter business completely. 250 jobs were at risk. And AMPI's annual payroll is over $12 million. So we put that package together. Parker Automation bought the CSM manufacturing building, who was a tenant of NUEDC in this building. NUEDC negotiated the sale of the building to keep Parker in New Ulm. Parker has 111 employees right now. NUEDC was part of a team that secured state incentives so that Kraft could make over $100 million in investment, saving 90 jobs and creating 50 new. And actually, I think they're in the 80s of new jobs, 83 or 86 right now. NUEDC proactively contacted LK. They did not reach out to us. We reached out to them. And we put together an incentive package, negotiated land sale for them to expand into New Ulm. LK has over 100 employees and an annual payroll of $5 million. Beacon Promotions. We put together a financial incentive package and negotiated rent in a building that NUEDC owned to get Beacon Promotions to locate in New Ulm. Beacon has 90 employees and an annual payroll of $5 million. Spexis. It's another company that we reached out to. They didn't reach out to us, and we worked with them for 7 years before they decided to come to New Ulm. So 7 years of calls, letters, emails, meetings. We invited them to expand in New Ulm. And New Ulm helped them identify a building, negotiate incentives, convince them to finally expand into New Ulm. Spexis has 30 employees and an annual payroll of $1.5 million. United Commercial Upholsteries. We reached out to them, to the owners, to relocate to New Ulm. NUEDC identified a building and negotiated incentives. UCU has 40 employees and an annual payroll of $1.4 million. Frontier Labs. We assisted in finding a building that worked for them and putting together incentives to get Frontier Labs to locate in New Ulm. Frontier Labs has brought 15 jobs to New Ulm. American Artstone. When Artstone was having some financial troubles a few years ago, and the public, I don't know, even knew about that, but we did because we had stayed in contact with them. We bought a vacant lot from them that gave them cash and allowed them to continue operations. They were on the verge of closing. And we agreed to not market or sell the lot. We would only sell it back to them when they were ready, and they have done so. United Steel and Recycling, or New Ulm Steel and Recycling. We put together incentives to allow New Ulm Steel and Recycling to grow their employment. New Ulm Steel and Recycling added 7 new jobs as a result. DLC Manufacturing. We provided assistance in finding a building and put together incentives to get DLC Manufacturing to locate in New Ulm. DLC has 6 employees and a payroll of about $300,000. So not a big business, but they're good jobs. Minnesota Valley Testing Labs. We worked with Minnesota Valley Testing Labs to address a variety of issues relating to their most recent expansion. And they added, I think, 3 or 4 new jobs. Any questions?
Brian, do you keep any numbers as far as some of these new jobs that you've worked with to locate, how much they've expanded in terms of their workforce and payroll since they first come to town? Because that's an important part of your role too, right?
Yeah.
As the company wants to expand, you're there to assist them in that
Yep.
regard.
Yep.
I mean, the numbers we see now are great with the numbers of employees, but I have to imagine that a lot of them started smaller and have had the opportunity to grow, and you've been a facilitator in their growth since that time?
Yes. All of them have grown, that I mentioned in here, have added new jobs. I don't have that committed to memory, but
Sure, sure.
Brian, I know that we now have the 40 new acres, and this really doesn't have a lot to do with your presentation, but how are you marketing the city's new 40 acres along with the current acreage that we have available? for
well,
industry?
it's not ready to be marketed yet.
Okay.
It's just farm ground. A business that wants to expand has a need now, so they need developed land. And so when we marketed industrial land, we market what's available now, with roads and utilities already in.
So that wouldn't start in your world until there's roads and,
Or when the roads are and utilities are scheduled, so we know a timeline.
Okay.
You know, I can envision it being, it's, if the work is gonna be done in 2020, that, in 2019, we can start marketing it.
just curious on that, thank you.
So are there any plans with the industrial park to do that at this time?
I think
On
they're
the city?
working on it,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
So if I were a businessman wanting to come to New Ulm today, what would you tell me? How would you sell me to locate in New Ulm?
Yeah. Well, it would depend upon what your needs are. Each one is different. Some of them don't want to own, some of them want to rent, so then I would provide information on available buildings that are already out there and vacant. If you wanted to build, then I would provide you information on available lots and any potential incentives that you might be available for.
And the NUDC has been a landlord in several of these instances, and then later had the capability to sell that property to the business owner as they got up on their feet.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, we have, yep. Beacon and Parker Hannafin are two of the biggest examples, but there have been others.
Okay. In your experience with other cities, does the city ever play that role as a landlord, or is that normally done by private corporations such as NUDC?
The city of Mankato had owned a business incubator, but I don't know if they had straight leases with, businesses that were not startups. They had acquired the old KAT building. I don't know if you know where that is.
Sure.
And they had converted that to an incubator.
So has your group talked at all about, I was thinking once we got this 40 acres, we were going to be like, wow, we're ready now. But then I talked to my colleague who is in Austin, and they just sold 180 acres in their industrial park. And I'm like, wow, we got 58, and they're selling 180 acres to a big Hy-Vee distribution center. And,
Yeah.
So are we close, or do we need to keep working on expanding this industrial park? I was thinking we were good, but after hearing that, I'm like, wow, we're not even close.
We don't score well with distribution centers, and those are usually
have a 4-lane.
We don't have a 4-lane. Yep. When Walmart was looking at locating its distribution facility, and they end up putting it over in Mankato, they came to New Ulm, and when they saw we didn't have a 4-lane, they left without much.
But even without those larger ones, where are we sitting with 50 plus acres? We in the high, low, medium?
We're probably low to medium. It depends upon what the appetite is and the available land. The land that the city purchased is bordering on an airport safety zone.
Right.
So you've gone as far west as you can. Then you've got to leapfrog that airport safety zone and go further out of town, west of Menards. There's a piece of land between Menards and then that pond area. Beyond that, it's across Highway 14 in the Thompson area would be the next logical place.
So is your group looking at that, discussing that?
We've discussed it. We don't have the balance sheet to buy it, to be frank. And we didn't have the balance sheet to buy the Schultz property.
Right.
He sold land to Menards and Walmart, and at $36,000 an acre, that's $1.4 million. We don't have that. That's why we had to pass it off to the city, even though historically NUEDC has been the developer of industrial park land. The circumstances out there went beyond our balance sheet.
So in your discussions, you're just not going to buy any future land? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, it's certainly a possibility that we could. We're not considering it at this time because of what the city has done.
I could imagine your purchases would be more on a niche basis for an individual business on a set piece of ground rather than large tracts of land, just because of the marketplace and where it's at today?
That's possible, but not economical.
Sure.
It's more economical to develop larger tracts of land where you put roads and utilities and a stormwater pond in to serve the entire tract.
Certainly, that's what businesses are looking for. And I know you didn't really mention Windings, but isn't that kind of their direction right now? To get everything under one
That's
facility?
what's being discussed,
Yeah, yeah,
and another business as well
okay.
has requested information about lots in the airport industrial park.
Brian, can you refresh our memory as far as the current NUEDC-owned industrial park land, what it started at and how many lots or acres are left?
We purchased it in 2 lifts. One was 4,500 an acre, and another was 6,000 an acre. We currently have 23 acres left, and I think there's 6 lots, ranging in size from just under 4 acres to 5.5 acres.
So that's 23 left, you said?
Yes.
And that would have started at 30-some acres, or do you remember off the top of your head or not?
In the low 50s. We bought, the total amount of land we bought in the 2 lifts was about 70 acres, but you put in roads and you put in a pond and whatnot, and you get down into the 50s.
There's some hilly area too, right, from what I remember?
Pardon?
Some hilly area that's not developable?
There is a little bit of a hill, yep. I don't know if I'd call it undevelopable. You could certainly put a dock on the low side.
And that dated back to, what, 10 years ago, the start of that? Or
Yeah, about that.
what I'm getting at is that started at 50-some acres, still 23 left. The absorption rate kind of
It's fits and starts. Yeah, that's just the way it is.
as I add on to Les's comment, is 40 additional acres enough? Well, it depends. Yes, it's not going to be a distribution center, but
Right.
but a typical business, if there is such a thing coming here based on their needs and that sort of thing, I would deem another additional 40 acres to be enough in the foreseeable future.
Yeah. With the 23 we got and the 44 that the city owns,
Correct.
that's easily 10 years worth, maybe 15, maybe more.
Or maybe a couple of years if somebody large came in. And
Fits and
we don't
starts.
know. Yeah, none of us know. None of us can predict that. But the start is better than where we were.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Brian.
Brian.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion to accept?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Motion is carried. Move on to item number 4 from the ADA staff regarding administrative activities during the month of October 2017.
All right, good morning. We'll start with the Section 8 report. On the first 2 pages, note we have 86 vouchers on the program for the month of October. Housing assistance payments to landlords exceeded disbursements from HUD by $11,568 for the month. I'll note that the new way HUD is funding us is they only want to send us what we need, and every now and then as our reserves build up, they force us to spend those down by underfunding us. So that's what happened in the month of October. So we had enough reserves to make up the difference, and our reserve fund is down significantly lower. Administrative fee program expenses exceeded disbursements by $1,200 for the month. Note on pages 3 and 4 of your report the unaudited balances for October. Note on page 5 of the report, 86 vouchers on the program as of November 1st with a waiting list of 82. Just wanted to mention that the 2017 Appropriations Act provided funding for approximately 5,500 new HUD Veteran Affairs Supportive Housing, or VASH vouchers. Typically, when additional VASH vouchers become available, they're only offered to housing authorities that have an existing VASH voucher program. However, this year, any housing authority administering a Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher program could notify HUD of their interest in the new VASH vouchers, including those not currently administering the VASH program. So I looked into that. In order to submit a letter of interest to HUD in these new VASH vouchers, we were required to consult with our partnering VA facility to request a letter of support from them, stating that if we started a VASH program, they would offer the services to those veterans in our area. With assistance from staff at Congressman Tim Wall's office and the Minneapolis VA, with assistance from staff at Congressman Tim Wall's office, we contacted the Minneapolis VA, and they determined that they were unable to provide us with a letter of support to start a VASH voucher program in Brown County at this time. They are sending staff over to Mankato for some of these vouchers, and they just didn't feel that they could also send staff to Brown County just because of travel cost and time. So as a result, we were then unable to pursue submitting a letter of interest for these additional vouchers. But I was hoping for a better outcome, but unfortunately we were not able to pursue that, but just wanted to mention that we did try. Moving on then to the public housing report. Program revenues have exceeded expenditures by just under $10,000 for the fiscal year to date. Broadway House is fully leased with a waiting list of 43. The family units are fully leased with a waiting list of 29. Note that we did have a HUD physical inspection of the public housing units in September. We received our preliminary score of 81 out of a possible 100 points. We submitted an appeal for a technical review due to a 10-point deduction at the Broadway House due to a speck of paint on a sprinkler head. That causes them to fail our entire sprinkler system, which is a 10-point deduction. We had Olympic Fire come out and take a look at it. He provided us with a letter that it did not affect the operations of the system. And with that letter, we were given those 10 points back, adjusted our score up to 91 out of a possible 100. A score of 90 or higher receives high performer status and a period of 3 years between inspections, so that was very good news for us.
Said speck of paint has now been removed.
Yes.
Good work.
So, yeah, I was very disappointed when I saw that initial score. So very relieved that we were able to get those 10 points back. He went in every closet with a flashlight, and he was looking for that.
For something.
Every year, the inspector seems to target something, and this year it was sprinkler heads. So we got dinged. Moving on then to the EDA report, note cash assets of $455,000. The sale of the spec house located at 629 Fender Drive closed on November 3rd. The spec house located at 633 Fender Drive has been staged, and they are having an open house at that house tonight.
Pictures look a lot better. And
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Century 21 updated the website with the pictures, with the staging, and
Thank you.
does look very nice. I'll just note also that staff had a follow-up phone call in October with MHP with our Strengthening Rural Communities Technical Assistance Grant. MHP applied for our DCI funding And they were recently notified that their application was not selected for those funds. They do have some remaining RDCI funding and some HUD funds that they are hoping to use to fund an upcoming housing institute. They won't have an answer on that for me until closer to the end of the year. When they are able to move forward with another housing institute, we will be offered the opportunity to participate in that because of our technical assistance grant that we're working with them on. So I'll update you on that as soon as I hear anything. I don't know if I'll have an answer at the December meeting, but I should have one by January. Other than that, they've just kind of told me to sit tight for now until they figure that out. So
Heather, could you explain what RDCI means?
I was hoping no one was going to ask me that because I do not know what that acronym stands for. I should have looked that up.
Rural Development.
Rural
Community
Development.
Initiative.
something.
Yeah, the I could be several different words that would probably fit. but
I would
yeah,
hate to guess.
It does originate from rural development.
Yeah.
We'll have to Google it. Moving on to the Property Rehabilitation Loan Program on page 11 of your report, note available funding of $279,000. No new activity there in October. Moving on to the Rental Property Fund on page 12, cash assets of $76,000. Staff held a preliminary meeting with a party that's interested in purchasing the EDA lots on North Broadway. They're going to get some preliminary drawings made and come back and meet with us again. And then when we're ready, we'll present that to the board, hopefully December. They're shooting for spring construction, so we want to keep that moving along.
We're just trying to determine how much of the 3 lots that the EDA owns on the north side of Broadway House, how much they need. Because we, in the past, have always said we'd like to keep half of a lot for overflow parking and the storage shed and that sort of thing. Their proposal is to use all 3 lots, and we just said, see what you can do. Either size or rearranging of your facility on 2.5 lots or shifting it, this way or that way. So we're just going to wait and see what they come back with on that. So it's just our interest versus development of that site. And the biggest issue is, as Heather has stated in past when we've had people look at the property, is it's kind of like our wintertime overflow. This is where our tenants park when they clean out everything. So what do? You got to move your cars so we can remove snow in the parking lot. Where do you park them into downtown? Because the streets are all likely going to be, being plowed out also. And so it's an interesting project. I hope it goes, but we just need to see that it kind of meshes with our needs too.
In addition to the overflow parking, we also have a need for storage. We can't store the lawnmower and the snow blower in Broadway House. We have to store those off-site, so we do have some storage space that's needed as well.
Yeah, and if we did store it on-site, it would eat up a parking space or 2. So that even makes the parking problem worse at Broadway House. So those are issues that are on the radar. So when they come back in, we'll see what they can live with and what they cannot live with. More to come on that.
All right. And then we'll finish up with the Garden Terrace report. Garden Terrace currently has 86 units leased with 69 on the waiting list. Currently have 2 vacancies. They had no turnovers during the past month. They have 2 move-out notices pending for December. And note the net incomes for October were lower due to payments in lieu of taxes.
Any comments for Heather?
One other item I'll just point out on activities. I should have checked with Park and Rec Director Schmitz last night. I did not, but he was going to bring up the Kiesling House and the empty lot adjacent to the Kiesling House that the EDA owns, which is also adjacent to the Lamplighter. And the property has historically been used for Park and Rec purposes. They've been used in conjunction with the Kiesling House. And I had suggested at this point in time that maybe, with the city or with the EDA looking to utilize funds and get into economic development and do some other things and hopefully pay off some of our debt, that maybe Park and Rec would be interested in buying that lot from the EDA, since they use it for Park and Rec anyway. And then that would kick, I don't know, $18,000-$20,000, towards the EDA. That would help pay off some debt, in the future. So, I would anticipate that the Park and Rec would lean in that direction. Because if we were to sell that lot off for a development for anything, the Kiesling House whole property becomes a very narrow tube. And it's not real appealing, I don't believe. So that would just kind of clean up that EDA-owned property.
It's in the paper this morning. I was surprised that we actually own that. I was like, we do?
Yeah.
We do receive some sort of rents from the Lamplighter, though, right, with that? Is that,
There's
Yeah.
an easement agreement.
Is
We
that
get
what it was?
$1,000 a year.
yeah,
It's
Yeah.
in the rental properties budget.
right. I just remembered seeing that, and,
Yeah, and that would all transfer, but it's just, I think about 7 years ago, the city council asked, where are our properties? And can we divest of those things that are just sitting there doing nothing? Maybe that would stimulate economic development. Maybe that get it into somebody else's hands. And so, where possible, much like the lot out by Kraft on the south side of Kraft when they expanded, we had I can't remember, 5-6 acre parcel, adjacent, to that we got off our books and got onto Kraft's books with this last development. So we've been working towards cleaning up odds and ends all over the place. And this is just one of those odds and ends that the ED owns. And if we're not going to do nothing with it,
don't really know what we could do with it.
So
So-
maybe you'll come back to us next month?
Yep,
Okay.
Okay.
that'll come back.
Right. Nothing else, may I get a motion accepting the report, please?
I'll move it.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor of accepting the Economic Development Authority administrative activities for the month of October 2017, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion is carried. Moving on to item number 5A, receiving the Section 8 Management Assessment Program score for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2017. Heather?
All right. This is a report that we submit every other year for the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. The Section 8 program is a nationwide program. The CMAP report gives HUD some information to evaluate how housing authorities are managing their Section 8 program. Through this assessment process, HUD identifies projects or agencies that may need some additional oversight. We have received our final CMAP score for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2017, received a score of 100%, which gives us a high performer rating. So the letter's attached. You can see that. Any questions?
Good work.
Thank you.
I'll offer the motion to receive the notice from the Department of Housing and Urban Development regarding our Section 8 assessment score.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion is carried. Moving on to 6A, consider authorizing the change order number 1 for the Broadway House roof replacement project.
All right. In the plans and specs for the roof replacement project, the intention was to reuse as much of the insulation on the roof as possible. Of course, we don't know until we get into the project what condition that insulation is in. They did find some deterioration when they got into the project, and that was causing the building to lose heat. It shrunk and there were some cracks, so it wasn't able to be reused as is. What GOG recommended was removing the top layer of fiberboard and installing a new layer of insulation and wood blocking to the entire perimeter of the main roof. This additional layer of insulation will prevent the heat loss and give the building a higher R rating. So we did have the building official and the facilities maintenance supervisor go over and take a look at it. They agreed with this approach. So we went ahead with it to keep the project moving. The additional cost came in at $9,000. Originally, we anticipated this project to cost over $100,000 because we were thinking we would replace all of the insulation. We decided to try and reuse what we could, so that brought the bid in significantly lower. So even with this $9,000 change order, we're still coming in thousands of dollars lower than we originally thought. So
I'll offer a motion to authorize the change order.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion is carried. Moving on to item 6B, consider motion authorizing payment of the public housing program claims. Heather?
I'll just note the claims were higher than normal due to the capital fund projects. We made a progress payment to GOG Sheet Metal for the roof in the amount of $45,000, and we made the final payment on the camera system project just under $17,000.
Where was that at, Heather? The security system upgrade at Broadway House?
Mhm.
I'll offer the motion to authorize payment of public housing claims for November.
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
Chair, I just got one on the Plunkett's pest control. $1,400 a year for spraying for pests? That's a lot of pests. Can we get some mouse traps or something? Is that really what we
That's
pay
part of
every
what-
year?
Mhm.
Wow. Okay. I guess we
That-
better not see any mice running around that building.
Is that inside and outside?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
everything. That's spiders and bugs and all that as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah. How many times a year do they actually show up? It's more than,
They come to Broadway House once a month, and they come to our scattered site rental houses quarterly.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The motion is carried. Moving on to item 7A, consider approval of the 2017 audited annual financial report.
Okay.
Nicole?
ABDO was here in August to conduct our annual audit for the year ended June 30th of 2017. So I'll just go through some numbers here pretty quick. It's a lot of numbers, but I don't know a more exciting way to present this. So, starting with
there is, but we can't do it here.
So starting with some financial highlights, there was increases in the unrestricted net position of $296,000, total net position of $259,000, cash and investments of $158,000, revenue increased $33,000, and the business type revenue increased $33,000, and the business type expenses increased just under $76,000. So if you compare the last few years, assets have held fairly steady. There hasn't been a lot of change there. Liabilities dropped considerably, mostly with the payoff of the Garden Terrace mortgages. And so that with the decrease in the liabilities, the net position has increased a little bit over the last few years. And then just to kind of break it down by the different programs within housing, within the EDA, the market rate housing, which is Garden Terrace, has a net position of 2.8 million. The public and Indian housing, which is Broadway House, has a net position of just 1.8 million. And then the governmental, which is the actual EDA funds, has a net position of just under 1.6 million. And then some smaller. The Section 8 is still negative. They're recovering from that GASB adjustment we had to make for pensions a couple of years ago. But that is coming up and should next year, I would imagine, be positive again. Looking at just the revenue trends, within the governmental activities, the revenues have dropped a little bit over the last few years. Business type activities, the revenue has increased since 3 years ago, dropped a little bit from last year. And the business type includes like Broadway House and Garden Terrace and Section 8, and then the rental properties. Expenses for governmental activities had increased last year, and that was due to the housing study was the big driver there. Business type expenses also increased, and there'll be another slide that'll explain what some of those increases were. Let's see, looking at the governmental activities overall, the revenues decreased by just under $10,000. Part of it was the loss on the sale of 612 Fender, and then there was less interest earned due to a lower cash balance. Expenses increased by $23,000, and that was the housing study, as I stated before. So their net position for the governmental portion actually increased $70,000. Looking at the public and Indian housing, which is the Broadway House, net position decreased $126,000, revenues decreased by $47,000, and expenses increased by $21,000. The decrease in the revenues was due mostly to a decrease in the HUD and capital and operating grants of about $45,000. And the expenses were due to small increases in salaries, maintenance materials, and utilities, and then depreciation, of course. Moving on to Section 8, the revenue increased by $26,000. Expenses increased by $33,000, and that was due to an increase in housing assistance payments. And then the net position overall was up $9,600. And that is actually, like I stated before, still negative, but should recover here in the next year. Market rate housing or Garden Terrace, the revenues increased by $15,000. That was an increase in rental revenue and interest. And the expenses increased by $18,000. And that was due to maintenance materials, utilities, and insurance. And the net position went up overall $302,000. Then the other rental properties, the revenues remained flat. Expenses went up just slightly, and so their net position increased overall by about $2,500. The increase in expenses that was due to the appraisals that we had done of 320 and 326 North Broadway. Capital assets decreased by $297,000, which is just the annual depreciation, so no big changes in assets. And then just a summary of the results. We received an unmodified opinion. If you remember last year, we had they caught us on we didn't have enough collateral to cover that. We had too high cash balance, so they called us on that, and so we put some things in place to make sure that we're watching that cash balance. And part of it was timing due to when investments matured and when we were able to replace them at the time. So that has been corrected. And there was no instances of noncompliance or that were material to the statements, and no deficiencies in the internal controls. After the audit, then they submitted the REAC report as required. And I don't believe they've heard anything back on that one, so I think everything has moved forward the way it needs to, and we're ready for next year.
Good job. Any
Here.
questions? Go ahead.
Oh, hearing none, I'll offer a motion to approve the 2017 audited report.
A second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The motion is carried. Moving on to item 7B, consider motion authorizing staff to pay final assessment for the 2016 USA improvements in Milford Heights Phase 1.
All right, we have received notices for the 2016 utility street and alley improvements in the amount of $520,755.46. Just in the overview note, the EDA fund has a current cash balance of $455,385. Talking with the finance director, she advised that we should keep $80,000 as cash reserves in that fund, which would give us just over $375,000 available to use if we wish toward this payment. I should note that amount, that's not the total amount. That's for the 18 lots that have sold that we're proposing to pay. The total amount was more 800,000, closer to 800,000, sorry. I'll also note the Garden Terrace Apartment Fund has a current cash balance of $1,360,350. The finance director advised that $250,000 should be kept in cash reserves, which leaves just over $1.1 million available to use toward this debt if we choose. So we received notice from the city finance director's office in regards to assessments for the 29 lots in Milford Heights Phase 1. The notice outlines 2 payment options for each lot. The authority can either pay the amount in full without interest or amortize the amount over 10 years with interest. Staff is recommending the first option, paying the assessments in full for the 18 lots that have sold. All of those 18 lots qualified for TIF, so those assessments totaling $520,755.46 are the EDA's responsibility to pay. And then staff is recommending taking the second option to amortize over 10 years the remaining assessments totaling $307,467.30 for the 11 properties that remain unsold. The reason for that is it's unknown at this time if those properties will qualify for TIF. We won't know that until the time of sale. If we choose the second option to pay that over 10 years on the 11 unsold lots, we would pay 3.2% interest. In looking at the available funds that we have to pay the $520,755 on the 18 lots that have been sold, we would recommend using the Garden Terrace Fund cash reserves to pay that debt. It's a one-time payment. Garden Terrace has the money available, so I guess that's my recommendation. But we certainly could also use some of the EDA funds in addition to some of the Garden Terrace funds if you wish.
The driving force on just paying these off is just simply that the current property values out there are unable to pay off the first debt, which was the water sewer pipe, the gravel base road, all the primary stuff that goes in when the development goes in. You may notice that Heather brings to the EDA and ultimately the city council a need to borrow money to make those debt payments. So we've got a loan from the EDA to the TIF to make that happen. So this assessment is phase 2, which is the curb and gutter, blacktop, street lights, sidewalks. So staff basically took the position that if the existing properties are unable to finance the first debt, they will be unable to finance the second debt. So it's just easier to pay off the second debt, save the interest. It's our debt anyway. We've got the money. Broadway House should replenish, in a year, this amount, so it's not, it's the reason we kept Broadway, not Broadway
Garden
House.
Terrace.
Garden Terrace. It's the reason we kept Garden Terrace, rather than sell it off and have one lump sum of money, and then when that's gone, it's gone. Garden Terrace will continue to help fund and finance EDA activities, if so desired by the EDA. But staff is recommending that we pay our debts and, try and get out of debt. And this is probably the best way to go about it.
Brian, do you know approximately what the differential is right now between the TIF money that we are collecting and what that annual debt service is required on just that first portion?
I thought we were down like $40,000 that we needed to borrow every year.
Yeah, I think next year's loan is budgeted at 45,000,
Yeah.
and that used to be 70, 80,000 a year, so.
So we're
See,
getting there a little bit, making some
Yes,
progress.
yeah, we're making.
Would there ever come a day where, and this TIF district, when does that expire?
25 years from when it initiated. So that's what I'm saying is, don't mess with the first assessment, because at the end, it might actually
End up
pay
making a
that
little
off.
Yeah,
Okay? But the second one, no chance.
yeah, we're
There's
never
just
going
no
to get
chance.
there.
So it's in our best interest to pay it off.
Well, we're also later in the game right now with that 25-year period, and this new bill has come due for the street
Right.
improvements.
Right,
And we may as well save ourselves some interest cost here.
yeah.
Right.
From a
Whatever.
fiscal perspective, this would be the right move, just looking at the revenue coming in and the expenses that we have.
And I think we need to note this, at least I'm going to say it, because I was around when this first got started. Everybody went into Milford with the best of intentions, and that TIF was going to cover it all, but the Great Recession hit, and this thing just dragged out way too long. Normally, when you talk TIF, you want something up and running in a relatively short time, just a few short years. And we all know that the EDA was burdened with this whole project on their own after we had solicited and gotten some partnerships to get some of the new houses built. We were left with just doing it on our own, so I don't think this was.
During the same time, all you have to do is go look at the tax forfeiture roll-up at the county and see all of the other subdivisions that went belly up.
Exactly.
This was not something that just surprised the EDA that we made the wrong decision. This was a full-blown economic event that took out 4 other subdivisions.
Right.
It's unfortunate, but we've got the debt, and this we've got the money too. The other subdivisions that went tax forfeiture did not have the money, so we're in a much better place, to be quite honest.
Would it make sense then in, say, a year's time to consider going back and just taking care of the remainder of that first phase? And then if we could essentially recapture some of the TIF money, and could some of that money then be used? Or once the debt's paid, does the TIF get decertified, or is
Yeah.
it does get
Yeah,
decertified?
yeah. Once
So we
once
need
the
the
debt
debt
is over,
there.
that's why we're saying,
Yeah.
let that first debt
Let it roll.
ride
Yep, okay.
for the length of time. And at the end, if it, instead of 25 years, it only goes 20 years, cool. But if you get to 25 years and it really needed to go 27, we still got to pay that.
Right,
It'll be paid in 25, but the fact is it won't pay it for itself.
sure.
So recommendation would be to let the first one ride, the second assessment pay off the TIF eligible ones, because that's our cost.
We're on the hook, yeah.
And if somebody were to come in and buy the remaining lots,
At least we
and-
have the opportunity to get those TIF certified.
if they're not TIF certified, they got to pay the assessments.
Sure,
And so why would we pay we'd have to raise the price of the lot,
sure.
from $15,000 to $25,000-$30,000 now, in order to get our money back. So I think a wait and see on the remaining lots, the remaining 11 lots, but pay off the ones we know for sure are TIF. That's our cost.
Sure.
And we can revisit this next year. I mean, all we're doing is signing up for it's a 10-year assessment. You can pay it off any time. So we're only signing up for 1 year's payment. We can look at it again, see if it's in our best interest to
And we
do
should,
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll offer the motion to follow staff recommendations on the payments as laid out, for the first assessment on the 18 lots with homes to be paid in full from the EDA, or from the Garden Terrace funds, and then option 2 for the remaining lots to kind of let it go and see what we do over the next year with the potential sale of some lots.
That was a long motion.
I'm sorry.
You get all that, Heather? I'll second it.
You can just say as recommended by staff. How's that?
Is there any other discussion?
I get paid by the word, so.
I almost made that comment.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion is carried. With regard to item 7C on the agenda, I believe that is being taken off at this time, correct?
No.
No,
This
we are
is
still gonna
on the
vote.
agenda. That's a separate issue.
All right, then we're going to move forward with item 7C, consider motion authorizing financing for the Assistant City Manager position.
All right.
Right.
Brian, will
As
take
I think everybody's aware, the city council is preparing to refill the assistant city manager position. It's being retitled to economic development assistant city manager. The focus is going to be on economic development as compared to the government side. City council has stated that, or some members of the council, and the vote went in that direction, that if we're going to be taking over the buying of the industrial park land and the developing of the industrial park land, that the idea would be we'll take over all the activities. We'll sell it, we'll market it, we'll do those same things. There is a reduction that the city council is looking at in funding the EDC of $50,000. The PUC is continuing to fund the EDC at $50,000 level, and it is anticipated that the assistant city manager position will run between $95,000 and $111,000 a year. It just depends on what wage we hire him in at. We pick the top one, so it's roughly 111 would be the worst case scenario. I think the city council is at least a few members that I've talked to and heard talk on this topic are more than willing to pay for the whole thing, pay for the whole cost of the assistant city manager. We'll see what happens in 2019 with the PUC if they want to, contribute. But that's a decision for a later date. The EDA has in the past said we want to get more into economic development. And there's been a long-running discussion about how we do that. When we didn't have any money, it was great to try, but if you don't have any money, you're not going to get very far. And now that Garden Terrace 1 and 2 are paid for, and we've got a substantial balance, that we can now utilize some of those funds for other projects that the EDA may want to pursue. And that might be doing buying other land, or helping the city do projects, or whatever comes up. That's up to the EDA and the city. Maybe you want to get into remodeling existing housing, grant programs or loan programs. Instead of building houses, maybe you want to fix up the existing housing stock. There's been programs like that in the past, and there's been discussion about that. So that's just one housing project. It's not really economic development per se, but it's something you could look at. Well, in this particular situation, we're just basically saying, I'm basically putting on your agenda for consideration is if you are interested in assisting in the economic development aspect of the city, you have the funds available, to do that. If you don't want to, that's fine too. The city council will have to make their decision based on that. But just understand that whatever economic development occurs, the city staff is going to be, your staff support for that, whether it's me or Heather or the assistant city manager. If the EDA wants, and since I'm the EDA executive director, you've got me working on any economic development. What the city council is attempting to do is to free up some of my time to do other things, and I would be more or less focusing and having the economic development assistant city manager do the EDA stuff, do the EDA.
Which is the way it
economic
used to be,
stuff.
right?
Yeah, the way it used to be. If you go back, it'd be like 6-7 years ago, the assistant city manager did all the, worked in conjunction with Mr. Schnobrick in community development and worked through the loans, that come through here. Worked through the city loans, through the city revolving loan fund, and did all that work. Well, when that position was unfilled, we separated all those things out, and Mr. Schnobrick got all the economic development stuff. I mean,
And a fine job he's done.
yes. And some of the jobs, like the insurance, went to finance. That Mr. McCauley, did all the health insurance, the liability insurance overview. That went to finance. And so we divvied up all the duties and we shipped them out. And basically what we found, over this 6-7 year period is that there's probably a better way to do what we did. We just dumped it. Like insurance will stay in finance, but other things will come back to this position. And one of those things is economic development. So, long story, background. And so I'm putting in front of the EDA an option to apply their desire for additional economic development activities, to also fund the economic development assistant city manager position along with the city council. You decide the amount, whatever it might be, but this is more like a 50-50. This would be 50% EDA, 50% city. Open to discussion.
Would this assistant city manager then serve as the executive director for the EDA then? That's what you would anticipate?
Yeah, I'm the executive director. Heather is the coordinator. And the assistant would be basically staff support.
Okay,
Just,
so
just like Dave does when, or Mr. Schnobrick does when somebody comes in for a revolving loan fund from the EDA. It's a team effort, Mr. Schnobrick, Heather, and I, we kind of sit down and go, how much money, how long, work the details out, get the applications done. So that would continue.
So you would continue to serve as our executive director?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm not changing anything. It's
Okay.
just that
That
I'll
person
be
would
shifting
assume.
some of my duties that I directly have my fingers in would go to the assistant. And primarily it's going to be economic development stuff. Not that when I'm gone that person's can still take over and do day-to-day operations, because that the assistant position will be versed in the government side also.
I know I
And-
sit here with two hats on. One is the city councilor, and I look at, as from a city council perspective, having the EDA fund economic development makes a lot of sense. I mean, it really does. As I sit here with my EDA hat on, I'm like, wait a minute, what are we going to get for our $50,000? And I think I'd want, as an EDA person, say, tell me what we're going to get for 50,000 or 40 or whatever we get. That there should be some type of agreement of responsibilities, so that we want to make sure we would get something for our investment, not just turn over a check. So I'm foreseeing if we want to go this route, and I kind of support it, but I think I'd want something from the city saying, yeah, if you give us the money, we'll make sure A, B, C, D happens. And what those are, I don't know yet, but that's kind of where I'm sitting on this. So
Yeah, and I'm just wondering too, because obviously you're coming forward now and requesting the $50,000. But in the request, it just says, and annually thereafter. Would you anticipate that you'd come back every year and ask us for $50,000?
No,
Or would
once it's set up, it's just like me. We don't come and say, how much are you going to pay for the executive
Right,
director?
I mean, it wouldn't make practical sense. So
No.
it would be incorporated into our annual budget,
Right,
basically.
right. And
So-
quite honestly, what you want that person to do is going to be based on your own desires. You want a new program. I mean, we already have the existing programs. You got the revolving loan, the small under 5,000 loan. We got the, up to $100,000 loan. I mean, those are already there. That would get taken over. That'd be the responsibilities of that person to do the EDA, economic development activities. You come up with down payment assistance programs. You come up with whatever. That's going to go to that position. To say that, we're going to, list everything
Oh, I'm not.
they do. I don't think we want to do that. Generally, I'm just saying, this person will be your staff economic development person as well as the city's. It might be that the EDA, or the city builds the second phase of the airport industrial park, buys the land, puts in the water, sewer, street, and somewhere in that process, the EDA says, there's a project out here. EDA, instead of the city buying the land and giving it to the business, it might be the EDA does something. Maybe the EDA loans money to buy the land. We don't know what that is now, but that activity would be run through.
So as it
This
currently
position.
stands, though, the EDA can't take on any debt without the approval of the city council. So would you
Right.
see that changing?
No,
So we're not going to change, so ultimately, it's going to go back to the city council for their discretion and final decision. So we would only act to recommend that sort of a scenario if we were to go and borrow money, for instance.
well, no, the EDA stands on its own. It's a separate entity from the city council.
Right.
Okay, so I'm not sure where you're.
Well, if we look at our current, under current ordinances, there's things the EDA cannot do without the approval of the city council, isn't that?
Correct.
Yeah. So we technically can't go out and go into debt ourselves without having the authority and the approval of the city council.
No,
Is it-
actually, that you can. What you can't do is sell property. You can buy all the property you want, but when it comes to selling it, then it has to go back to the city council.
Right, but I think if we were to go into debt, say issue bonds.
Yeah.
Only the bonds can be issued through the city and not the EDA, correct?
It can be issued to the city, but the EDA has, I believe, unfettered responsibility to issue its own through the name of the city.
Okay.
You have that
So
power to do that.
we can go forward and say we want to work on this particular project. and
Right.
We want to issue debt and bonds to do this sort of
Yeah.
thing. And then we would, because in my tenure, Garden Terrace was already in the works before I ever sat on it.
Yeah, we've never done it as long as I've been here.
So-
Whereas the PUC, because if you just do a revenue bond through the PUC, like your utility bills are going to pay for the debt.
Right.
If you did just a pure revenue bond, I don't know that you technically actually have to come back to the city council.
Okay.
But what happens is the PUC utilizes what we call the double diaper system. They use the revenue, it's a revenue bond, and then on top of that, they pledge the full faith and credit of the taxing authority of the city to support it, and that's why we get the lower interest rate.
Okay.
And it's that obligating the taxes that has to go through the city council for sure. Now, the revenue bonds will still go through the city council. But I'm not so sure that there's actually like a control. They say, oh, no,
Oh.
you can't do that.
Okay.
But
Maybe-
when you utilize the the taxing authority to support, if your revenues aren't high enough, that's a city council decision. And they can say, no, we're not gonna levy taxes just because you came up short on that. So, and the EDA is in the same sort of boat in that respect. They have the authority to issue their own debt
Okay.
for housing or economic development or for any purpose that's allowable by law.
So, the PUC currently funded $50,000 to the NUEDC, and the city
It's
did
in their
not.
budget. It has not been approved yet, yes.
Who approves that? The city council or PUC commission, or how?
PUC approves their own budget. The city council will see that budget come before them, but it's received, I don't know that they actually approve the PUC budget. The PUC actually, operates city-owned property, if you want to look at it in that respect. The city owns the land that the PUC operates on, so the water treatment, the wastewater, it's all under the name of the city of New Ulm, which the city council controls. The buildings are owned by the city council. The PUC operates within those buildings to make sure the water is there and make sure the electricity flows and all the other good stuff. And so when you look at their budget, it's an operational budget, and it's when it comes to selling land or buying land, they have to get permission from the city council. The EDA, on the other hand, actually has statutory authority to buy and sell land and issue debt. It's there. Now, there's probably a consideration for the city council to run it past them and make sure it all works, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But PUC does not have statutory authority, where the EDA has statutory authority to do these things. It's right in state law.
So Brian, do we know why the city maybe hasn't asked for this funding in the past? Or
They have.
They have? Okay.
They have. You paid a piece of the assistant city manager when it was filled, just like you pay a piece of my wages, and EDA. See, what happens is is all the EDA staff are contract employees. They are city employees. Heather is a city employee, not an EDA employee. What you are doing is contracting for her time. You're reimbursing the city for that cost.
Okay.
So in the past, I might be at, I don't even remember. Nicole would probably have it, but maybe I'm 10% of my position's expenses go to the EDA, and the assistant city manager might have been 20% at the time, and Heather is 100% to the EDA. So those I would even guess that Nicole, a piece of her time is applied to the EDA because she does all the finances for the EDA. So she's a city employee, and so at the end we'll go 10% of this, 20% of this, 5% of this, 15% of this. We put it together, and that goes over to Heather for the budget. This is what the wages are for the EDA. So
We're not obligated necessarily to hire simply city staff for EDA activities. We just do so because it kind of makes the most sense.
it's economical and feasible because
Yeah.
The fact is, if you were to say I want to have my own personnel director,
Well,
doesn't make a
not
whole lot of
cost-effective.
sense.
Yeah.
Because you don't have any employees.
Right.
Right.
Number one. So it just makes sense to divvy it up pieces. The other thing that comes into play here is this is just for the first year, to be truthful. If the PUC says, okay, now we've changed our mind next year, what are you going to have? 150%? That don't make sense. So everything would shrink down so that you'd only, everybody take a piece of it. So we won't know the exact results until, a year or two down the road, how this will play out. It might be flexible. It might change through the next year or two.
So this person would play a huge role, you would perceive, going forward for the EDA commission in terms of the direction that the EDA would want to go, and would it make sense? I don't know if a final job description's been created at this point for this position, because it sounds like you're pushing it in a different area than perhaps what we've seen in the past. It's going to be concentrating more directly involved with economic development issues. And so I don't know if, to that end, if a final description's been created.
Well, the job description has been created, and like all job descriptions, they're fluid.
Sure.
The city personnel committee set it up. It's been, handed out, publicly. And it is the intent that as we get through the first year, we may say, nope, that changed. Job description is going to change. It's going to, go this way. Less of this, more of that. Just because we haven't had a person in this position for, 6-7 years, it's kind of, bringing it back. And like I said, some of the things that this position used to have, they're not going to get back. But some of the things that they used to have, they're going to get back in an economic development manner. They're going to get more of it. That's going to be more of their responsibility. So it's going to be a fluid first year. Like everything, our expectations are put on the job description, but when we actually get down to doing it, things might shift a little left and a little right, and we'll need to modify the job description to reflect that. Because we could have just said on the job description any and all things that the city manager requests to be done. We've tried to identify the economic development things that we saw, working with the state of Minnesota, working with, whomever, and put it down so it was easily recognizable and easily readable, but it is subject to change.
So back to my original comment in regard to PUC currently funding $50,000 to the NUEDC in the city of New Ulm, not doing that. We're kind of in a split arrangement currently, but what I'm getting at is apparently, I don't know what took place here with the NUEDC and their request for funding and not being on the agenda. I'm not sure. Apparently they're placing on the agenda next month. I would like to see this tabled to give them the opportunity to present what they have in mind before acting on this.
Yeah, I have to kind of agree. A couple things. I don't want there to be any appearance of any impropriety, just because it sounded like it was some sort of misunderstanding with them being heard with their request. And I kind of wonder, going forward, what role this assistant city manager is going to play in comparison to what we currently see being done with the NUEDC. Obviously, if we're going to be giving money out to the tune of $50,000, the last thing we'd want to see is some sort of duplication. And it sounds like in some sense, Brian related earlier that the NUEDC just doesn't have the deep enough pockets to necessarily go out and secure their own land like they maybe once had. And so in some sense their role has changed, but it doesn't diminish the other roles they've played in the community in terms of industrial and economic development and bringing in and attracting new businesses and growing and maintaining the current businesses that we have. So it puts, I guess I feel like we're in kind of a quandary here with two competing entities, if you want to call it that, one being the city and one being the NUEDC, looking to have the EDA assist them in some sort of funding capacity. So I guess I would maybe support the position too, to table it and let's get all the cards out on the table maybe next month and just let everybody give their best presentation as to why they feel the $50,000 should go to them. I don't want to feel like we're in some sort of contest or whatever, but I don't know what else to call it at this point. It's I don't know if it would make sense for the EDA to agree to fund both, because I personally believe that some of that money may be spent in some sort of duplication of activities and responsibilities, so.
I agree that maybe we should table it. Could we also have, I've seen the job description, but I'm assuming other people on this table probably have not.
I've
Have that
not.
attached, as
Yeah.
well as, what I thought about earlier is not specific exactly what day-to-day duties are, but what, again, for this table is what would the CDA person, do for the $50,000 we're gonna give them.
Right, and Mike
It's
had
part of the
mentioned,
job description, I guess, but.
Mike had mentioned earlier, I think this was even before the meeting started, about a mission statement for the EDA, and the other thing, I'm really excited about the EDA playing a greater role in the wider spectrum of economic development. I think if you look at it, if you talk to people in the community, we've always been just given the label of, oh, you're housing, and I think if we've learned nothing else over the last year, economic development in the broader sense of job creation and business development goes hand in hand with housing. And so I think an entity or a party that really has its fingers on both pulses is going to be used to better serve the community. So I, for one, would love to see the EDA play a greater role in expanding some of the activities we get involved with in a broader sense. So to that end, I would maybe, along with our funding, we should really consider the EDA getting involved with some sort of a strategic plan over the next 5 years and how we want to play a greater role in the broader spectrum of economic development. So, and I know, I think we'd had some discussion too about getting all the bylaws changed and updated from the city attorney. It would be great timing to get that involved with the possibility of funding, involved with a greater emphasis on economic development, and then the strategic plan. I kind of see those three things kind of going hand in hand with one another.
Yeah, I don't know that the bylaws are necessarily anything real pertinent to change. The bylaws are you got a chairman, a treasurer, and
Well,
more or
there were
less
a
the
couple
rules
things
of how
that-
you operate. The enacting resolution is actually more important because that actually spells out what the EDA is supposed to do. And so Heather's been working with the city attorney's office to update that, so we're in compliance with state statute. There's a couple spots where things have changed and we needed to update that. But I just want to also point out that the EDA had been paying for this position in the past. The members of the council said, this is the direction we want to go. And I believe they're more than willing to pay 100% of the assistant city manager position. A couple of weeks ago, I was just sitting there going like, yeah, but the EDA wants to do economic development. They used to help pay for this position in the past. So, like 2 weeks ago, I said, Heather, maybe we should recontact the EDA and say, since you were doing this before, do you want to do it now? The only big difference is 20% versus 50%. That's the only difference from 6-7 years ago. I can get you the exact number. I'm just saying it's a smaller number than 50%. I know that for a fact. I just don't know what it is. And so I requested that that it be placed on the agenda for your consideration because of your past history of saying we want to get into economic development, and I can't imagine that you wouldn't be using a staff person to do that, And then secondly, I think yesterday I got included on an email thread that basically said, hey, we're going to make our monthly report, and oh, by the way, we're going to ask for some financing. And then I said, well, you can ask. It's just the EDA can't act on it. It has to either be part of the budget discussion, which then you could act on the final budget, or it could be part of an agenda item, which then you could act on that item, but you still would have to include it in your budget and act on the budget, in the end. So that's a two-step approach. So that all kind of happened yesterday. And so that puts us where we are today. So, if we want to run it till the last, basically it's the last meeting to December, for this year, I would anticipate that we would be utilizing, as the recommended on the issue sheet, we'd be utilizing, in essence, fund balance to do this. We're at the maximum for our tax levy, so it doesn't really matter. Our tax levy is what our tax levy is.
Right.
We can't go any higher than that. So if we decide to add it to the budget, the EDA budget, it just becomes, we're going to draw down the any fund balance or cash reserves we have. So it doesn't change taxes. It doesn't do anything. So that decision could be made on January 2nd. It could be made on March 15th. It's whatever date you guys choose to make that decision.
I'm going to offer a motion to table this item for December for additional information, as discussed.
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Having no other business on the agenda, this meeting is adjourned.
I agree with you on